Welcome back to part 2 of this very large cornice that we are building and upholstering with a piano hinge in the center. So now we're working on the facing. This cornice has no welt, so this time we're just doing a facing, which would normally be in the same fabric as the cornice. But because of the blue trim, the designer wanted to go with a solid facing as to not take away from that trim detail. So this is a solid piece of linen in the same background color. And I'm stapling the edge of the facing right to the lip of the cornice. The plywood that the cornice is made of is 1/2 inch. So I'm using that 1/2 inch of space to staple the facing right to that edge. And it's cut on the bias because there is that little bit of shape. So when we wrap it around to the back, it will fold around those shapes really nicely. And now we're at the corner where the return goes back to the wall 90 degrees. And normally with a welt, it's a little bit easier to feel where this goes. But without the welt, I'm just mitering that corner and flipping it back and forth to make sure that once I staple that lip into place, flip it back and check it, that it makes a nice miter when I turn that corner. And now we're going back over that whole piece with tack strip. And we're only working on the left half of this cornice, which is to the left of the piano hinge. The facing needs to be in 2 pieces so that you can actually close the cornice at the piano hinge for transportation. Otherwise, you would build it all in one piece and just use one piece of facing. The only reason there's that split in the middle is because of the piano hinge. And so now I'm making sure that the staples are buried into the tack strip, which normally is not a problem, but with the facing just being regular linen with no welt, I want to make sure that there's no dimples to the tack strip with the staples. So I'm just ensuring that with the hammer as I go along the cornice with the tack strip. I'm using a tack strip that is the same size as the plywood, so a 1/2 inch tack strip. This allows me to feel along the bottom edge of the plywood and keep the tack strip aligned evenly with the plywood so that I can make sure that it's giving me a straight edge at the top of the plywood where the fabric meets the facing. This gives me a nice clean finishing edge. And that's also important because there's no welt. It's going to be the same situation if there was welt, but since there isn't, I'm being extra careful to make sure that that line where the fabric meets the facing is extra smooth and straight. Right here in the corner, I had to add an extra little piece because there was a little gap. So if you have to smooth any parts out, you can just cut a little piece and add it. And on the return, you start a new piece. And sometimes I put 2 layers of tack strip on that return edge for a smooth finish. On a cornice this large, I don't finish the returns until I flip it over. So right now the return fabric is pinned into place, and since I have it finished on the front, now I flipped the cornice over and I'm pulling that fabric around the returns nice and smooth, stapling it into place. And if you can see the little pins holding it into place, I can tell if I'm pulling just right because the pins are holding the fabric. A long nose staple gun is essential for this reason, which is the same staple gun that I use to cover the fabric on the front so that I'm not switching back and forth between a regular staple gun and a long nose. I just got tired of switching back and forth and got used to using the long nose all the time. So now I'm in the corner where the facing wraps around to the back, and I have cut a little slit into that facing to relieve the pressure in the corner. And the fabric is wrapped around the returns and stapled into place, and now I'm cutting away the extra fabric. Whenever possible, I like to wrap the inside of the returns with the face fabric, just in case it's visible from standing underneath the cornice, rather than lining it with lining. So in this case, I had plenty of fabric to wrap around, which makes it a nice finish. And then the facing, that is the solid, is going to wrap around the inside of the return also, but I'm going to kind of tuck it underneath the face fabric, and then I'll finish the face fabric as carefully as possible over that facing. And basically, you'll just see the pretty fabric and then the solid on the edge of the return on that 1/2 inch lip. But on the rest of the back of the cornice, you'll see a couple inches of the facing, the solid color facing. And so I'm just stapling that return underneath the face fabric and then clipping away any excess. The key here is to staple a little at a time, cut the extra away, staple a little more, cut any extra away, staple some more, fold in the raw edges, staple, cut away extra, fold in the raw edges, and just keep repeating until you have the finish that you want. And the key is cut away a little at a time until you can manipulate just enough raw fabric and fold it out of place until you're happy with it, and then staple it and then cut away extra. And now that blue trim is going to wrap around and cover up my staples, which I will hot glue once I'm ready to glue in the GIMP. So you can see right there, I folded under the raw edges where the return pretty fabric meets the facing solid fabric. And I'm only doing that in that little area since it will be visible from underneath. The rest of the return where it's raw, the fabric is raw, that will be covered up with the lining. And then here I'm tucking the blue trim under as well and just pinning it into place temporarily. And then I'll move on to the rest of the facing. Take those pins out. So now I'm going to staple the rest of the facing, and I'm going to pull snugly as I go, not too tight, but you want to pull out any wrinkles, and then try to get a somewhat straight line with your staples so that anything that might show through will look nice and consistently straight. And then you're going to cut off the extra. So right there, I'm double checking that I'm not pulling too tight where the shape of the cornice is, and making sure it looks good from underneath. And then the rest of the part is straight, so that is a little easier. And you want to go along and staple kind of close together so there's no little dimples in between. And then you're going to staple all the way along that straight edge and then cut off the extra.